Hello everybody, welcome back into the Color Gemstone Academy. My name is Paul Deasy, your instructor, and this is my YouTube channel, Paul Deasy Gemstones. Now before we get into the lesson, I want to remind everybody, if you have not done so, please hit the subscribe button. I know it says subscribe, but it doesn't cost you anything. It is absolutely free, but it certainly helps me out. Now before we get into the questions and comments, which I'm doing at the beginning of each lesson now, I want to encourage you to keep those questions and comments coming. I reached out to a very good friend of mine. His name is Thomas Elliott, and he knows more about gemstones than anybody I know. I know a lot about gemstones. He's forgotten more about anything that I'll ever know. I've traveled the world with this guy. He knows everything about mining. He's been involved in ownership of mines all around the world. He's one of the few graduate jeweler gemologists. He has started appraisal companies for shopping channels. This guy knows it all. So if you have any questions, the weirder the better, or the more kind of out of the ordinary, the better. I'm going to do a taped lesson with him answering questions that you submit. So let's get those questions coming in. Okay, so let's go to this week's questions and comments that I got. Now we'll read them off. So if you see me looking down, I'm reading off of a list. Judy F says, I have a ring that is supposed to be Sleeping Beauty. How can I find out if this is true? Well, I don't have a really great answer for you, Judy, and let me explain why. Even the Gemological Institute of America cannot tell by trace elements if a turquoise came from this exact area of Arizona, Globe, Arizona, where the Sleeping Beauty mine resided. I will tell you also, having been in the business for many, many, many years, I even have people that have been suppliers of mine or manufacturers of mine telling me, well, listen, as long as it's Robin's Egg Blue and it doesn't have any matrix, then that's Sleeping Beauty Turquoise. And I say, no, that's not really true. In fact, I know for a fact when I've been to the Kingman mine and I talked to Marty Colbaugh, he finds material out there that has no matrix and is a Robin's Blue color. Not a lot, not as much as Sleeping Beauty, but he can find some of that material. The difference is he doesn't try and pass it off as Sleeping Beauty, even though the people that are buying from him say, yeah, I want that Sleeping Beauty that's $2,500 a carat, or $2,500 a pound, or $3,000 a pound. He says, I could sell it to you for that, but it's not Sleeping Beauty, and this one's only $1,500 a pound. So it's really kind of funny how it's taken on a life of its own. So my best advice to you, Judy, and everybody who's listening, it is really important that you trust your source. And that's why I say I will always disclose if something has been dyed, something that has been stabilized. But you have to trust your source, just like Marty Colbaugh, a guy that I've known and trusted forever. He will tell you what is and what isn't a Sleeping Beauty. But there's no definitive way to tell, even with testing, if it has come from the Sleeping Beauty mine. So hope that answers your question. It may not be the answer you were looking for, but it is the best answer that I can give. Okay, next up, actually sort of related, believe it or not, to the Sleeping Beauty question. It's a different question from Nicola B. What is the Zachary process? And her second question is, or his second question is, how can dyed turquoise be recognized? Well, I will tell you that it would take me an entire lesson, if not maybe two of them, to describe in minute detail what the Zachary method is all about. But let me explain what it is and how it came about. Most turquoise, as you know, is very, very porous. And if you don't do something to fill those pores, it will start to absorb maybe the oils, lotions off of your body, and then the color will change over time. So that's why they fill those pores with either a plastic or some sort of resin. They infuse it into the stone so it will keep it from absorbing anything else, and the color will remain constant. Well, for years that was the accepted practice, that we are going to use this infusion, and it costs money. I mean, it's not cheap to stabilize turquoise, and most turquoise, probably 95% or more, is stabilized these days. But there was an electrical engineer by the name of James E. Zachary, and he is an electrical engineer by trade, but he grew up in and around the turquoise business. So he was looking for an alternative way to treat or stabilize turquoise without any artificial plastics or dyes or infusing it with anything like oils or anything like that. So he came up with a proprietary method called the Zachary method, which doesn't involve any of the plastics or resins. It involves using an electrical current passing through the rough with other elements that aren't artificial. And what it has is a way to stabilize the stone, and actually it passes for a natural stone if they test it, although there's some sophisticated ways you can tell if the Zachary method has been employed. But it makes the stone much, much more durable without the addition of any of those resins or plastics. Now, over the years, there's a guy by the name of Sterling Fouts. He's been in the turquoise business for a long time. And he, in partnership with James E. Zachary, he sort of bought or paid for the rights to use that technology to stabilize the gemstones. And because he is one of those people, again, you got to know who to trust in the gem business. He allowed, or he explained, without giving away the process itself because it is proprietary, he explained how you can test to see if something was treated with the Zachary method. Now, I want to make one thing very, very clear. The Zachary method doesn't work on all turquoise. It has to be medium to very high grade turquoise in order for the Zachary method to work. So it's used on a lot of the Sleeping Beauty and some other high grade turquoise in the market. But to make a long, very, very long story short, there is a way to test with a spectrum analysis of a gemstone, and destructive test too, I'm going to talk about in a second. But with a spectrum analysis, when you see an elevated level in potassium, that's generally a great way to see that is employed the Zachary method. Now, on a chart I'm going to show you on your screen right now, you're going to see 4 different gemstones. One is a natural Sleeping Beauty stone with no treatment whatsoever. The next one over is going to be a surface treatment of the Zachary method. The next one will be something that is a full-blown immersed Zachary method, and then the final one is that full-blown immersed Zachary method with another added surface treatment to improve the color of that Sleeping Beauty turquoise. So that's a little bit of a dime store approach to explain what that is. As I said, it's a very complicated process. It would take me probably a couple of 2 or 3 to go through all of the boring scientific analysis that goes into the Zachary method of a gemstone. Now, the second part of the question, I haven't forgotten about that, is how do you know if a gemstone, specifically a turquoise, has been dyed? Well, there is most of them are destructive tests to be able to tell that it's dyed. And sometimes if you've been around the turquoise business long enough, you can sort of tell. But basically, if you take like a Q-tip and you dip it in acetone, which is nail polish remover, and you go to the underside of the setting, let's say it's a ring, where it's not going to be noticed, and you rub that with the acetone on the Q-tip, if blue comes off on that Q-tip, then that turquoise has been dyed. They did the same thing with lapis. When I was, Judy and I were in Hong Kong, we went into the regular China, not Hong Kong, to go to a show, a mall that was nothing but gemstones and beads. And I was asking about some lapis that they had, and I said, how can I tell this isn't dyed? And they went and got some lapis from another vendor, and then they had their lapis, and they said, they filled a glass full of acetone, and then they dropped in their lapis. Nothing happened. They took it out. It was just as good as before they put it in. Then they took this other material that they bought from another vendor that was dyed. They dropped it into that cup of acetone, and the entire cup turned completely blue. And even over time, if you're wearing something dyed like lapis and your body heats up, you might find that it leaves, discoloration on your skin or your clothing. That's a sure sign that it has been dyed. Well, that's going to do it for our question and answer portion of the lesson. So remember to keep those coming for my upcoming lesson with Thomas Elliott. Okay, so now we get to today's lesson, which happens to be on emeralds, a beautiful, beautiful gemstone. This again comes from a subscriber request. And I believe it was Tommy who said, I'm getting so confused at all these different types of emeralds and where they're coming from. Can you give me a lesson on emeralds? Well, that's what we're here to do today. So let's start from the very beginning. Emerald is part of the beryl family of gemstones, spelled B-E-R-Y-L. What is beryl? What does that mean? It is beryllium aluminum silicate. So any gemstone that has that as its chemical composition is in the beryl family of gems. Now, did you know that there's emerald and there's also something called green beryl? I know what you're thinking. You're saying, Paul, isn't emerald just a green beryl? No, not necessarily. An emerald is a green variety of beryl that derives its color from the trace elements of chrome and vanadium. A green beryl, on the other hand, and you'll see them side by side or one after the other as I show it to you, is a little bit more of a lighter color, not really that deep green color that you're used to, because most of that color is coming from the trace element of iron. So there is a difference between an emerald and a green beryl. So if you have no chrome in the gemstone, it can't be an emerald. Just like I said with turquoise. No copper, no turquoise. Same with an emerald. No chrome, no emerald. All right, so let's talk about some of the other members of that beryl family, just so you can familiarize yourself, and then I'll give you the vital statistics on those stones, because that's how you identify gemstones. So there is a blue variety of beryl that most of you have heard of. It is called aquamarine. Other than that, again, same chemical composition as the emerald, happens to be the blue variety. Likewise, the pink or sometimes peachy pink variety is called morganite. And there's a funny story about morganite. I'll get to that in another lesson. There's a yellow variety of beryl that is called heliodor like the sun. And then there is a colorless variety of beryl, as most gemstones will have a colorless variety, that is called goshenite. And that, again, is a beryl. It's a cousin of the emerald, but it happens to be the colorless variety. And then probably the rarest of them all, excuse me, is something that is called bixbite. And bixbite, I believe, was originally discovered in California, or at least there was a mining operation with that. And it is a very, very rare and very expensive red variety of beryl. But this lesson is about emeralds, so let's get into that, and then we'll talk about some famous emeralds in the future. Okay, first of all, let's go over those vital statistics. Beryllium aluminum silicate, that is the chemical composition, and its crystal structure is hexagonal. And again, these are some of the measuring steps that they take to identify that a gem is what it is. Has a hardness of 7.5 to 8 on the Mohs scale of hardness, a little bit better than your quartz. Your toughness is rated poor to good. Remember, for those of you that are new, hardness is the ability to withstand scratching, or literally the ability for one gem to scratch another gem. And toughness is the ability for a gem to resist fracturing or cracking altogether. So it's poor to good on the toughness scale. Refractive index, that measures the sparkle of that gemstone, is 1.57 to 1.59. And the specific gravity would be the heft of that gemstone is 2.69 to 2.80. I always give you the comparison of a sapphire or a ruby, corundum, which is 4 in its specific gravity. Now here's the first thing I think, Tommy and everybody, that you need to know about emeralds. Emeralds are not evaluated in the 4 C's the same way that other gemstones are evaluated, particularly when it comes to clarity. There are certain gemstones that aren't as clear, or they're more naturally included than other gemstones. For example, it's not tough to find like an amethyst or a citrine that has no visible inclusions even under a 10 power magnification. Not so with the emeralds. Emeralds have very visible often very visible inclusions or clarity characteristics to the naked eye, but because it's common in certain gemstones like an emerald, it is not evaluated in the same way. For example, a D color flawless diamond has to have no flaws, not only with the naked eye, but under 10 power magnification. Well, they're a little more forgiving in the emerald. The way I described it in my book is that emeralds are graded like that really hard science or math test that you had in high school, where everybody in the class did so horribly that they graded it on a curve. So in other words, this much of the class got the A, and so on and so forth, even if they really had only half of the answers correct. Well, that's the way that they evaluate the emeralds as well. It is definitely graded on a curve. Now, emeralds are found in many locations, including the USA, but Russia, China, Bolivia, Brazil, Colombia, Zambia, other African nations as well. But for the purposes of today's discussion, I'm going to talk about the 3 most viable commercial sources for the emeralds. That's going to be Colombia, Brazil, and Zambia. Now, how do we sort all of this out? What's the most important thing? I think a lot of times we get so tied up in the pedigree of a gemstone. Where is its nationality? Which mine did it come from? Well, that's not the most important thing, and I've preached this for years and years and years. Color, color, color. Color is the single most important defining characteristic that affects the quality, the rarity, and ultimately the price of that gemstone. Well, the same is true with your emeralds. Colombia is certainly the pedigree that everybody looks for. That is the most common, really high-grade emeralds come from that country. Reason for that as well. So pay close attention, especially guys like Tommy that wanted to know what's the difference between an emerald from here and an emerald from there. But it all comes down to those trace elements. Now remember, I said you cannot have emerald without chrome and vanadium. But it depends on what saturation of the chrome and vanadium you have for which color you're going to ultimately see. So if you go to Colombia, where they have extremely high content of chrome in there, that's that beautiful deep Kelly green, Irish green that you're accustomed to when you think about an emerald. Brazil, not as much of the depth of that chrome, although you can find a great looking emerald from Brazil. It doesn't mean that it's any less great a gem, but you would probably pay less for that than you would for the Colombian. Now let's get to the new kid on the block, and that would be the Zambian emeralds. Emeralds out of Africa, and specifically Zambia, have become more and more popular. And what they lack in the same color of the Colombian emerald, they make up with their clarity. Now the clarity is generally better. Now it doesn't mean that it's going to be completely clear all the time, but they have a reputation for a little better clarity than what's coming out of Colombia. And by the way, there's a way that they treat to try and get around that clarity. I'll talk about that in a minute too. What is characteristic of those the Zambian emeralds is they have, remember I said chrome and vanadium, they have a higher level of vanadium, a little elevated level of vanadium. And vanadium is the same trace element that makes tanzanite blue. So what you're going to notice with the Zambian emeralds is they're going to be a little bit more of a bluish green than the pure emerald green that you're used to when you're looking at the Columbian emeralds. And I'll show you pictured examples of both the rough, and you can see a little bit more of that blue cast in there, as well as with the finished cut stones. Now, how do they treat emeralds? Emeralds are almost 100% treated. Not 100%, but almost 100% treated. Basically, they use an infusion of oil into that stone to kind of fill some of those cracks and crevices that naturally occur in emerald rough. It's not as permanent, say, as a heat-treated sapphire, and over the course of a lifetime of an emerald, it might have a tendency to leach out some of that oil, in which you would have to have it retreated. But most people will wear emeralds. It's still considered a semi-permanent treatment on on emeralds by the Gemological Institute of America. Okay, before I get to a little rapid fire session on some of the most famous emeralds in the world, I thought I would be remiss if I did not explain to you about laboratory created emeralds as another available option for you. I'm speaking specifically about synthetic emeralds. That means they are lab created emeralds. It doesn't mean that they're fake. They are an actual gemstone. They have all the same physical, chemical, and optical properties of its natural counterpart. The difference is it was grown in a laboratory using the same ingredients, not taking millions of years to form in the Earth's crust. Chatham emeralds in particular, I've had a history with them over many, many years, including in the shopping channel business. They are, in my opinion, the best. You can see what the crystal looks like in the rough form, and you can also see some of the finish. And you can see almost absolutely no inclusions in that, and it is a genuine emerald. The difference is, rather than being thousands and thousands of dollars per carat for an emerald with that kind of clarity naturally, I remember, and I'm dating myself now on the time, but I remember buying a stone to replace my mother-in-law, Judy's mother-in-law's emerald that she had missing from a ring, and it was $400 a carat. And that's a far cry, and it's a very, very beautiful stone. So I wanted to talk about that, so you know that there's an alternative if you don't like the clarity of the emeralds you're looking for. Okay, I know this has been a longer lesson than ordinarily, because first of all, I'm long-winded in the first place, but I gave a very long-winded answer to the question about the Zachary method of stabilizing turquoise. So I love to give you some looks at some of the most famous emeralds the world has ever seen, but I'm going to do it in a much more rapid pace than I normally do, so I don't make this lesson run any longer than it already has. So let's start with one of the most famous emeralds ever found in the United States of America. It is called the Carolina Emperor. It is a 65 carat emerald discovered in Hiddenite, North Carolina in 2010. Many of you probably didn't realize that there was mining operations for emeralds in North Carolina. And that one is estimated to be worth over $1 million. Next up, we have the Chalk Emerald. It is a 37.8 carat ring designed by Harry Winston, donated to the Smithsonian Institution by Mr. and Mrs. O. Roy Chalk in 1972. And then, of course, you know you couldn't get away without seeing an Elizabeth Taylor. This is Elizabeth Taylor's Bulgari Emerald and Diamond Pendant Brooch. Richard Burton purchased this brooch for Elizabeth Taylor during the filming of Cleopatra in Rome in the early days of their romance. Approximately 23.46 carats. It was worn by the actress at their wedding in 1964. I should say that wedding. It was worn by the actress at their wedding in 1964 before being sold at Christie's in 2011 for $6.6 million. To this day, it holds the record for the most expensive piece of emerald jewelry ever sold at auction. And then we get to Queen Elizabeth II's Vladimir tiara. Reportedly, Meghan Markle wanted to wear it on her wedding day to Prince Harry. However, this was denied because of its somewhat shaky provenance. What do I mean by that? Well, for centuries, it was in the crown jewels of Russia. And then it was smuggled out of Russia and sold to Queen Mary, who is the current, or was the current queen's grandmother. And so you don't want to go flaunting something that was basically stolen and smuggled in the first place. So it wasn't worn at the wedding. Okay. Then there's a platinum and emerald ear clips owned by the Grand Duchess Vladimir. This sold at Sotheby's in 2014 for $1,055,000. And now we get to the Statesbury Emerald. This legendary stone, comprising more than 34 carats, was owned by three distinguished American collectors: Evelyn Walsh McLean, May Bofels Stanton, the heiress to the Denver Post, and renowned socialite Eva Statesbury. The fabled journey of this emerald also included mounting in 4 different jewels, twice by Cartier and twice by Harry Winston, during the heyday of the jewelry collecting craze in America. The Statesbury emerald sold for $1 million at the Sotheby's Magnificent Jewels auction in 2017. Now back into the Russian history, we have Catherine the Great, and she had an emerald necklace. Tsar Alexander II gifted this to Grand Duchess Vladimir in 1874 upon her marriage to his son. Sold at Christie's, Geneva for $4.5 million. Now a little bit closer to home, we have something that is called the Flagler Emerald, weighing in at 35.02 carats and of classic Columbian origin. This extraordinary stone came to Sotheby's in 2015 from the estate of Mary Lily Keenan Flagler. Those of you who may not know, Mary's husband, Henry Flagler, was almost single-handedly responsible for establishing Florida as a resort destination we know today. So it sold for nearly $2.8 million in 2015, soaring above its $1.5 million estimate. And now, take a look at this one. This is the Rockefeller Emerald, weighing 18.04 carats. This octagonal step-cut emerald was purchased by John D. Rockefeller Jr. for his wife, Abby Aldridge Rockefeller, who wore it for years as a part of a brooch that was designed by Van Cleef and Arpels. After her death, the brooch was broken down and the stones were distributed to her children. Her youngest son, David, received the large center stone and commissioned the jewelry designer Raymond Yard to turn it into a ring. There were hardly any inclusions. It was classified as a classic Columbia. It boasted an absence of any treatment whatsoever, which is very rare for an emerald of this size. It sold to Harry Winston in 2017 and achieved a record price per carat at $305,516 per carat. That's $5.5 million. And we get to the DuPont Emerald. All these rich people in America, huh? A lifelong supporter of the arts, Jessie DuPont bequeathed her Tiffany & Company ring with a 9.11 carat emerald to the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts after her death in 1970. It remained in a drawer in the museum, insured for $25,000 until 2019, when it came to Christie's to be sold to fund new museum acquisitions. It fetched $1.65 million at auction. And finally, the Cartier Art Deco Emerald, Diamond, and Enamel Brooch. A great example of emerald carving by artisans in India who really kind of pioneered carving non-traditional gemstones that were carved. The brooch sold for $1.45 million at the Christie's Maharajas and Mogul Magnificent Sale in June of 2019. Again, sorry for the more long-winded than normal lesson, but I hope you enjoyed it nonetheless. Remember, if you have not yet subscribed, please subscribe. It's absolutely free. It costs you nothing to do so. If you want to share this with your friends, you can do that too on your channel. I really appreciate your subscriptions, and we're really rising up the charts every time. I want this to be the biggest weekly free gem classroom the world has ever seen. So keep on subscribing. I'll see you next week. We have a new lesson every week at Saturday at 10 in the morning. And I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye, everybody.